NBC's Shaquille Brewster is live in St. Clair, Michigan, getting voter reaction to the Epstein saga. MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin joins me as well. Lisa, the White House said that the president was directly responding to a question about Giuffre. It didn't bring it up himself. Whether he was answering a question doesn't seem to be the family's point. Can you talk about the Giuffre family's visceral reaction to having the word stolen used when talking about their loved one and the ongoing possibility of a pardon?
Well, as Virginia Giuffre's family raised in their statement, Virginia Giuffre experienced quite a bit of trauma at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and she struggled with that from a mental health perspective for the better part of 20 years before taking her own life. So their wounds are incredibly fresh, Chris, at having lost their sister and their family member. But it also raises a bunch of questions. You know, you used the word stolen. I'd like to know why Trump thought that a person who was serving sort of as a glorified towel girl as a teenager in the Mar-a-Lago spa was an employee that could be stolen. Was he that invested in all of his employees? What did he understand Jeffrey Epstein had, quote unquote, stolen Virginia Giuffre to do? What was the nature of her employment? And of course, we know that Jeffrey Epstein remained on the Mar-a-Lago membership rolls until 2007. And so when did he become aware of the fact that Virginia Giuffre was no longer working at Mar-a-Lago, but instead was in the employ of Jeffrey Epstein? And of course, there is the worst, sort of the worst wound of all, which is referring to another human being as stolen in a circumstance where we're already dealing with child sex trafficking. That use of word, whether or not intentional, has to be really visceral for the Giuffre family, as you just mentioned.
I also want to bring in Jeremy Peters, New York Times reporter and an MSNBC contributor. The Giuffre family reacted to what were arguably the most expansive comments we've heard from Donald Trump so far about this specifically, the case, the victims, right? What does it say to anybody investigating this that he might know more? As they're suggesting, does he know more than we thought he did?
I mean, we won't know until he's questioned, if he's questioned. And, given his expansive views on executive powers and the prerogative of the president, I wouldn't expect that to happen very soon or very easily. Like, he's not going to go willingly if it does come to that.
But he seems to be giving more information extemporaneous.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. The unsealing of the Epstein files has, well, kicked up a massive political storm, right? So today, we're going to get into a really controversial comment from Donald Trump, then look at Ghislaine Maxwell's, let's call it a high-stakes chess match, and see how the massive risks tie them both together. So where does this all kick off? Well, it really starts with just one single word. President Trump used the word stolen to describe Virginia Giuffre, who, as you know, is one of Jeffrey Epstein's most prominent accusers. And that one word, boy, did it ignite a firestorm of questions right away. Okay, so let's dig into that. A president's controversial words. Why did that word, stolen, cause such a huge reaction? Well, it's because...
And his folks are saying, well, he was asked the question, but he has control over how he answers it.
Right. And as we've seen many times with him, he is hardly precise with his words and often gets himself into trouble like this, overstating things or understating things. I mean, this is, a serial problem with President Trump and his use of language. It can be evasive, it can be misleading, it can be distracting, diversionary. So I would expect more of that. I mean, to come from him. We don't know, Chris, a whole lot about their relationship because Trump hasn't been very forthcoming about it. And a lot of what we know, unless Jeffrey Epstein somehow documented it, would come from somebody who can no longer speak for himself.
Yeah.
So, there have been some journalists poking around on this. Steve Bannon supposedly has some tapes interviewing Jeffrey Epstein, Michael Wolff, but we'll see what those say.
Yeah. Lisa, according to USA Today, and they point out that Ghislaine Maxwell is inmate 02879509. She grew up in a 51-room mansion. She spent at least a decade close to the ultra-wealthy Epstein. And, quote, now spends her days teaching yoga and etiquette classes at a federal corrections institute in Florida, waiting to see if she will get what she wants again. But it seems
It instantly brought up some really tough questions. Like, what did Trump know? And just as important, when did he know it? And you have to think about it from the victim's perspective. For Virginia Giuffre's family, hearing that word was, just an incredibly painful reminder of everything she went through. Their statement made it really clear she endured this unimaginable trauma from Epstein and Maxwell. So for them to hear her describe that way, it just made all those wounds feel raw again, incredibly fresh. This is exactly what got legal analyst Lisa Rubin thinking. She started asking some pretty sharp and frankly unsettling questions. I mean, think about it. If you're the president and you think an employee from your own club was stolen, what exactly do you mean by that? And what did you think Epstein was going to do with her? What did that job entail in your mind? But of course, there's always another way to look at it. You've got folks like Jeremy Peters from the New York Times who point out, look, this is kind of classic Trump. He's hardly precise with his words, right? He often gets himself into trouble with off-the-cuff remarks. So is it a slip-up or something more? That imprecision just adds another layer of complexity.
your administration officials tells NBC no leniency is being given or discussed, although there's the asterisk because when asked, Trump himself noted he is allowed to grant a pardon, and he's just not looking at it right now. But is there another option, which is a commutation that could offer her a shorter term? She's 63 now. On her projected release date, she'd be 75. Is a commutation possible, and who could make that offer?
Well, commutation is certainly on the table and certainly within the president's powers, Chris, in the same way that a pardon is. And the ultimate decider of that decision is, of course, Donald Trump himself, perhaps contingent upon what Ghislaine Maxwell has shared. When we think about Ghislaine Maxwell and what information she has at her disposal, Jeremy was just mentioning the fact that Trump and Epstein's relationship is sort of shrouded in mystery, both because Trump hasn't spoken very much about it and Epstein isn't available to talk about it. But you know who is Ghislaine Maxwell. And in many of the pictures of the two of them together, Ghislaine Maxwell is there. That could have been a law with Todd Blanche, particularly given some reporting that the Trump camp believes that the initial disclosure of the birthday book and Trump's alleged letter to Jeffrey Epstein came from Ghislaine Maxwell's camp. There is a belief out there that Ghislaine Maxwell did this to try and pressure the Trump administration into taking her seriously as she is trying to get a pardon. Now that we know that the Supreme Court isn't even going to consider whether to review her case until September 29th, Ghislaine Maxwell is sort of left dangling out there. But guess what? So is the Trump administration, because they don't know what other shoes could drop. So, yes, is a commutation a possibility here? Sure. Is that something that the victims would be just as vociferously angry
here? Okay, so that's the Trump side of it. Now let's pivot to the other central player in this whole drama, Ghislaine Maxwell. Because from what we can tell, she's making a really high-stakes play for her freedom, all from behind bars. I mean, the change in her life is just wild to think about. This is a former socialite who grew up in a 51-room mansion. And now she's inmate 02879-509 in a Florida prison with a release date that puts her at 75 years old. So when you're facing the real possibility of dying in prison, you're probably looking for any way out you can find. So what does a way out even look like? Well, for her, it means presidential clemency. And there are basically two flavors of that. You've got a pardon, which is the whole shebang. It completely forgives the crime, restores your rights, everything. Then there's a commutation. That one doesn't wipe the conviction clean, but it does reduce the sentence. And for her, that could be the difference between getting out and, well, not. And this all leads to a really big question, a critical theory about her strategy. Is she actively trying to, pressure the Trump administration? Is she trying to force their hand to get that clemency? And get this, there's a theory floating around, apparently from inside the Trump camp, that her team might be the ones behind some of these strategic leaks we've seen, things like Epstein's birthday book being disclosed or that alleged letter from Trump to Epstein. The idea is she's dripping out this information bit by bit to basically show them what she could release, hoping it pressures them into taking her clemency request very, very seriously. But here's the thing. Even if she is pressuring him, for Trump, helping her out in any way means walking into an absolute political minefield. And when we say minefield, we're not exaggerating. The political risk to the president here is absolutely immense. We're talking potentially catastrophic fallout, especially with his own supporters. So why is the risk so huge? Well, it goes deep into the conspiracy theories that are wrapped all around the Epstein case. A lot of his base, the MAGA supporters, truly believe this whole thing is a massive cover-up by the global elite. There are theories that a client list exists that could crash the whole global economy. So if Trump grants her clemency, he's not the hero exposing the swamp. He's seen as part of the cover-up. That would not go over well. And look, it's not just his base he'd have to worry about. This is one of those rare issues where everybody agrees. The opposition to clemency for her is completely bipartisan. You've got Republicans and Democrats pretty much in unison saying any kind of deal for Ghislaine Maxwell is just a non-starter. Absolutely unacceptable.
Agree about as a pardon? I would expect so, given Ghislaine Maxwell's active participation not only in the trafficking of these girls, but in the molestation and sexual abuse itself, Chris.
And Jeremy, pardons, commutations, they both fall under sort of a general heading of clemency. Is there a big political risk for any level of clemency? Obviously not just upsetting the families, the victims, but I mean, both Republicans and Democrats have been pretty vocal about their opposition to it.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. The political risk to the president is immense. I mean, the roots of this conspiracy theory run so deep, and in the minds of MAGA supporters, this is something, a cover-up that has been executed to conceal the misdeeds of every powerful person imaginable in American politics and global finance. I mean, one of the conspiracy theories that I heard recently was that Trump has been told not to release this client list, which we know from reporting does not exist, because it would implicate so many business leaders and financial titans that it would bring down the global economy. I mean, that's the level of conspiratorial delusion you're talking about here. So he could pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. He could, give her clemency. I don't see him doing any of that at this point, but it wouldn't do any good toward making the base satisfied, the true diehard believers truly satisfied that they know everything there is to know, because that's what happens with conspiracy theories. No amount of disclosure is ever going to be enough.
Which brings us to the final piece of this puzzle, the big looming uncertainty that's hanging over absolutely everyone involved. What other shoes could possibly drop? Yeah, exactly. Maxwell is left dangling, right? She's waiting, hoping for some kind of lifeline. But here's the twist. So is the Trump administration. They're caught in the exact same spot, in the exact same state of uncertainty, because they have no idea what other shoes could drop. And why are they so uncertain? It's simple, really. Jeffrey Epstein is gone. So that makes Ghislaine Maxwell one of the very, very few people left on this planet who actually knows the truth about the relationship between Trump and Epstein. Think about it, she was a constant presence. I mean, you see her in so many of those photos of Trump and Epstein together. She was right there, alongside them. Epstein can't talk, but she can. She was a witness to a relationship that, to this day, is still mostly shrouded in mystery. She can speak to it when basically no one else can. So what we're left with is this incredibly high-stakes game of political chess. It's a standoff, right? A standoff defined not by what's being said, but by everything that's being left unsaid. And in this game, it's the inmate who seems to be holding all the cards. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, what does Maxwell know? And maybe more importantly, what is she willing to use to get exactly what she wants?